So there seems to be a paradox. Or contradiction. On the one hand, I've heard you many times. I've heard you say that even this would be giving the separate self some existence or indication of an existence. On the other hand, I've also heard you talk about spiritual bypassing when we do not take responsibility for our actions or for taking a stand. And the first question that was asked about the responsibility for our choices in life seems to bring it up in me, where it seems on the one hand, if we do say that we're responsible, we give the separate self the credibility, right, in existence, and on hand not to do it would be a spiritual bypassing.
Okay, so let me be really clear about this. If anyone writes a book about these matters, has a YouTube channel, has a meeting, does webinars, has a website, they are by definition making a concession to the separate self. If they stand up and say, this is a radical teaching, there is no separate self, there's nobody here, there's nothing to do. If they really thought that, they would not be speaking. If there's nobody here, then who are they speaking to? Does awareness need to hear their talks and read their books? No. But who are they doing it for? The fact that they are doing it betrays the fact that they do think that there is somebody there to listen, and they do think that there is something for that person to do. What do they believe that person should be doing? Attending their meetings and reading their books. Otherwise they wouldn't have them or read them. So all teachings, even the ones that say this is totally radical, there's nobody here, there's nothing to do, it's not true. There are no radical teachings. Well, the only radical teaching is silence. So yes, I make compassionate concessions, and different amounts of concession depending on one, my mood, and two, the person I'm speaking to. Who was the nice man yesterday? Couldn't decide where to live. Was it Carlos? Are you there, Carlos? I was a little fierce with Carlos. I hope softly, but I was pretty firm with him yesterday. Very direct. I felt a lot of love and affection for him. I felt I kind of understood him. I thought, I know your predicament, and so I felt this close affinity with him, and that gave me the confidence to be very bold with him. But it was very bold. I wouldn't, and so that was my mood. I was just feeling strong and direct. Didn't want to compromise. I just wanted to give him the just clean, clear, straight. Where if somebody else had asked the same question at a different time, and if they'd been a different person, I may have been less direct and softer. It wouldn't have been less true, but there would have been some intuitive feeling in me. No, don't be too radical. They'll just leave. It'll be counterproductive. It won't help them. It'll just make their predicament worse. I intuitively felt that Carlos was strong enough to take. And that, as I said, so with another person, I would have. It's not. I don't work it out. It's spontaneous and intuitive. But another person would have the same question would have elicited a different answer. So, and that's very important about the non-dual, the expression of the non-dual understanding, is that I feel strongly that it needs to be tailored in the moment to each person, and that. One of the hallmarks of a genuine teaching is a teaching that is not principled, that doesn't always say the same thing in response to all the different questions, but tailors the understanding sensitively, uniquely, question by question, and therefore might seem to contradict itself. If you compare what was said to one person yesterday and another person this morning, they may appear to say the opposite things. No, they're not the opposite thing, because they come from the same understanding, but they're tailored uniquely to the two different situations. And a teaching that always says that the same thing, there's nobody here, there's nothing to do, in response to all questions, or ask yourself the question, who am I, or where do your thoughts come from? That's a mechanical answer. It's a beautiful answer. There's nobody here, there's nothing to do is a beautiful answer when it's exactly the right answer on those rare occasions when it's appropriate. Ask yourself the question, who, somebody raises a question, I feel upset about this. So who is the one that is upset? It's the classic self-inquiry. That's fine. That's a good answer occasionally. But just to use that as a mechanical technique betrays for me either of those two answers used mechanically. And you can tell whether it's mechanical because they're the answers that are given to every question. To me, that betrays that the teaching is not coming from the right place. It says the right things, but it's not coming from the right place. And because it's not coming from the right place, it's not really the non-dual teaching. It appears to be, but it's coming from the memory, it's coming from the past. I would far rather hear someone respond spontaneously in the moment and perhaps couch their answer in conventional dualistic terms that would seem to credit the ego with its own existence, that would condone the existence of the ego. I'd far rather hear a response like that, but and yet feel that the response came from understanding, albeit tailored to this person's understanding, than to hear perfect non-dual words spoken mechanically in response to every question. So that's why you will sometimes hear contradictions. That's why sometimes I will not give the ego any wiggle room at all. I just undermine it. And like I did last night with Carl Aspen, and other times I might seem to be far more tolerant of it, very gentle with it, very, very soft and accommodating.
So for us, the same choice, I feel, comes up also from the position of the self when we have afflicting emotions that arise, or situations, other challenges. So I feel in my experience, I also have to make a choice.
That's right.
Whether I take the approach to say a firm no.
Yeah, you're absolutely right.
So any sort of guidance for us to follow?
It has to be spontaneous. Just so you a feeling of jealousy arises. You're either going to be tough with yourself. On whose behalf does the jealousy arise? It arises on behalf of me. Who is this me? Can I find this jealous self? You go inside. Do you find a jealous self if you go inside? No. You find feelings and the space of awareness. But you never find a jealous self in between the space of awareness and the jealous feeling. So that's being very clinical. You just undermine the feeling at its origin. Or you might take the tantric approach. You feel yourself as the open, empty, loving space of awareness, and you might welcome the feeling, embrace it, kiss the toad. So one would appear to undermine the separate self at the heart of the feeling, the other would embrace it. Which to take, that's for you to know. You have to experiment with that. In practice, I would recommend at different times applying both approaches, because they're both very effective and they work. You can't apply them at the same time, but I would recommend you use both approaches in your life.
Thank you very much.
And then, of course, the same goes in our relationship with other individuals in a not in a teaching situation or a formal therapy session, but just when you're with friends or family. Sometimes you may be very tolerant and compassionate of some egoic outburst, and sometimes less tolerant, a little bit more clinical. So we're like that both with ourselves and with others. And how do we choose between the two? It's just sensitivity and intuition.
Yeah, I find that also those kind of methods, at least in my life, it seems change throughout my experiences and where I am at a certain point in my life.
Yeah, and of course some characters are sharper, some are softer. Ideally, we want our range to be as wide as possible, so we're not always soft, we're not always clinical, that we have a full range, both in relation to ourselves and in relation to others. That makes us a broad human being.